stakes in this election couldn't be higher.
November 5th will be the most important day in the history of our country.
Hello and welcome. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns here in Atlanta inside the presidential debate spin room. Welcome to a very special edition of America Decides. Tonight, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump will take the stage here in Atlanta. It's the earliest televised general election debate ever. And we're in the battleground state of Georgia. This is a state that both of these candidates have narrowly won in the past in different years. So far this year, though, it is a toss-up. The question tonight, will the candidates focus on the issues, or will we see a repeat of the last time these two shared a stage during the chaotic debates of 2020? For more on all of this, let's bring in Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes. They are here with me in Atlanta covering this historic debate. Bob, I want to start with you since you're here with me in the spin room. Let's talk about the Trump campaign. What are you hearing? What's your reporting telling you about what their preparations are for tonight and what they expect?
There are pretty low stakes inside the Trump campaign at this moment tonight. There's a belief that former President Trump has the consolidation right now of the Republican Party around him. Now, inside the highest ranks of the Trump campaign, they know that not everyone loves former President Trump. He's not everybody's favorite. There are still some Nikki Haley-type voters out there who have reservations about his conduct, reservations about how he handled 2020. But at the end of the day, there's a firm belief on the Trump side that Republican voters are going to support the ticket because they don't support President Biden and his policies. The question tonight for the Biden campaign, I'm told, is can he start to win over at all independent voters, traditional Republicans? Can he start to peel away at that Republican consolidation? Because it is there. But there is a belief in the Democratic Party that in the suburbs of Philadelphia, the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, some of those Republicans who are business-minded might have concerns about how Trump has behaved in the past. They're winnable, and Biden's going to remind them about abortion rights, January 6th, Trump's criminal conviction. And the real battle tonight, though, is going to be over the economy. That's the kitchen table issue. Does Biden have an answer on inflationary pain? And how does former President Trump really make the case on the economy? Is it just about trade and immigration, or can he broaden it? That's what I'm watching tonight.
And Bob, you and I have been covering this presidential race all year. And what's so remarkable about it is the race hasn't shifted. It has been close, 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 especially in those key battleground states. Do you think tonight, given the timing of this debate, that's the earliest that we've seen a presidential debate, can really change the trajectory of this race?
I've been told that former President Trump and President Biden both believe this really matters tonight because all the insiders have been paying attention to the race all year.
Yeah.
But most people are living their normal lives. They're not like us. They're going on vacation. They're dealing with their school year.
What's that like?
Their jobs. Well, we both could use one after this campaign. But they believe that this is an opportunity tonight to reintroduce two candidates who are so well known to a country that seems to be, based on polling, pretty weary about this entire campaign. So both campaigns are trying to present a smile tonight. I'm really watching tonight former President Trump. I'm told he wants to come out low simmer, not be immediately throwing rhetorical punches at President Biden, because he knows he paid a political cost in 2020 by being so aggressive interrupting President Biden, then candidate Biden, that he came across as a bit much. And this is about reintroducing Trump, making him someone who's palatable, someone who's acceptable to voters.
Well, we heard from Trump, and now let's hear from our Nancy Cordes, who is outside the spin room. And I know, Nancy, you've been covering the Biden campaign. They have been preparing vigorously for tonight's debate. Tell us a little bit about those preparations.
Well, Caitlin, one of the things that the Biden team told me today that President Biden has been preparing for is to fact-check Trump, because they believe that Trump is going to tell a lot of lies tonight. And they say that President Biden is going to call him out on it. He's going to mention when he thinks something's untrue. He will point it out. He will say the truth, they say, and then move on. So he knows that he needs to focus on his own record as well. But he's not going to shy away from calling Trump out. Beyond that, they want him tonight to portray Trump as someone who is too dangerous to return to the Oval Office, someone who has promoted political violence within the U.S., who is now a convicted felon, someone who is facing indictment right here in the battleground state of Georgia So that is going to be something you will likely hear from President Biden tonight, a focus on January 6th. In particular, as they try to make the case that Biden is the safer choice for the next 4 years.
And Nancy, what's at stake for the president tonight? I know that's a big question, and I know these two have debated before, but he is now the incumbent. So a very different environment than 4 years ago.
A couple of big challenges for him. First of all, as Bob pointed out, inflation. He can talk all he wants about the great unemployment rate that the country is experiencing right now, wage growth, et cetera. But the Biden campaign and the White House are well aware that people have really felt the pain from inflation over the past few years and that he can't just ignore it. So I'm told he will acknowledge head on that rising prices have been a problem for Americans. He'll talk about what more he wants to do to address it. But beyond that, the other big challenge for them is that they know that there are a lot of Americans out there who are on the fence solely because they have concerns about his age and his ability to serve for another 4 years. So he needs to have a strong performance tonight to show that he's in command of the facts, to show that he's confident, to show that he is he's just as capable now as he was 4 years ago. And that's tough because in a 90-minute debate, anybody can forget a fact. Anybody can trip over a line. And so, this is just, increasing the stakes for him tonight, even though these are issues that he has been tackling for years now.
All right, Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it. Let's bring in Georgia Governor Byron Kemp. Governor, thank you so much, and thanks for having us to your wonderful state, a big battleground state, of course, this time around again. You made some news last night by admitted that you did not vote for Donald Trump in the Republican primary. You said you showed up to vote, but you just didn't vote at all. Why not vote for anybody?
Well, I mean, look, everybody else was out of the race. Trump was the presumptive nominee, so, I mean, it really didn't matter. But, I'm not focused on the past. I've said for a long time I was going to support whoever our nominee was. We had a lot of great Republicans running. They battled it out. Donald Trump's at the top of our ticket. And that's what I'm focused on, is making sure that our whole Republican ticket here in Georgia carries the day. As you know, we've had, some interesting campaigns in our state over the last 2 or 3 cycles, and I want to make sure that we do like we did in 2022 in my reelection campaign, and we win in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, you were reelected handily in this battleground state. Has the Trump campaign or anyone from his campaign or Trump himself reached out to you to make amends and ask for your help?
Well, no, I haven't talked to him about that, but I also don't need a phone call. I've said that a lot. I'm a team player. I've really said a lot of times that I think the former president needs to be forward-thinking, focused on the future, telling people, why people should vote for us. That's what I did in my reelection campaign. But, I'm doing the same thing. I'm being forward-thinking. I'm not worried about the past. I'm not worried about, the primary. I'm focused on knowing that the American people and people in Georgia cannot afford another 4 years of Joe Biden.
In that primary, Nikki Haley got a sizable chunk of support from voters, especially in the suburbs. What should the Trump campaign take away from that?
Well, I mean, look, the same thing happened with President Biden. You had a lot of states around the country where, he wasn't bringing all of his voters home either. And that's what happens in primaries, so I don't worry too much about that. But I think tonight is a great opportunity for former President Trump to tell people, you cannot afford another 4 years of Joe Biden. They know that. They know that every day when they go to the grocery store. They know that every day when they're going to the gas pump. They're seeing the disaster at the border and wondering how many terrorists are coming across, how many, cartel members are, bringing human trafficking, drug trafficking, fentanyl. They've seen the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan. They're having trouble paying their rent. I mean, there's a lot of ways that Donald Trump can post up against Joe Biden's record. I think, he's going to have to stay very focused because Biden's not going to want to talk about those things. They're going to want to distract from his record because it's so bad.
In the coming days, at least before the Republican National Convention, Trump is expected to announce his vice presidential pick. Who do you think among the top contenders do you think would make a good choice to reach out to the types of voters you're talking about?
Well, I've been telling a lot of people, of all the people that I think and here that are being considered, I think they would all do an unbelievable job posting up against the Biden-Harris administration in a debate with the vice president. I mean, they're very accomplished people, and I think he'll make a good pick. And so, really, I think any of them would be a great coalition to go to the American people and really continue to contrast the two records.
As it stands now, do you think that Trump will win Georgia?
If we were voting today, I believe he would. And I think if he stays focused tonight, telling people, what he's for, and contrast the record with Joe Biden and remind people that they can't afford another 4 years of the Biden administration, I think he'll win in November as well. But we cannot take that for granted. Like Georgia, we have had our shares of ups and downs, so nobody needs to get complacent. We cannot get distracted. We got to work hard on the ground game. We got to get people to go vote early, take them off the field so it reduces the size of people we're going after, and work really hard. And that's what I'm going to be doing to hold our majorities in the legislature, and then also that goes and helps the top of the ticket.
And just to remind our audience, the former president was very critical of you because you certified the election results here in the state of Georgia. Does the idea that now you are supporting him, you're supporting the ticket, does that signal that you think Republicans are coming home?
Well, listen, I followed the law and the Constitution. That's what I'm going to continue to do, and I know that upset him in some ways, but that's part of politics, and I'm looking forward, and I feel like he is too. But I do think people are starting to come home. I mean, not everybody's happy. There's no doubt that there's people that don't like either one of these folks, but that's why I think there's an opportunity based on the records of when Donald Trump was in office versus what people are dealing with when Joe Biden's been in office with 40-year high inflation and the disaster at the border. People at the end of the day got to decide, am I not going to vote at all? And if I decide to vote, who am I going to vote for? I think people are going to vote for somebody that's going to, help their pocketbook, help keep their family safe, and help secure a border and do all these other things that Joe Biden has not.
And you said that you're going to help to get those voters out here in Georgia.
We're working on that as we speak.
All right, Governor, we will stay tuned. Thank you again for having us in your state. We appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Honor.
And President Biden touched down right here in Georgia on Air Force One earlier this afternoon, and he spent the week at Camp David preparing for tonight's debate. An official from the Biden campaign joins us next. You're streaming America Decides.
I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago?
And you're looking live at Atlanta. Here we are right here at the site of the debate. We are actually inside the spin room here in Atlanta for this first presidential debate. And ahead of that debate, we are now joined by Quentin Fulks. He's the principal deputy campaign manager for the Biden campaign. Quentin, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So we're here in the battleground state of Georgia. You have a connection to Georgia. You ran now Senator Warnock's Senate campaign and that successful runoff that we all watched. As it stands now, do you think Biden will win Georgia?
Absolutely. I mean, we see Nikki Haley, the support that Nikki Haley got in this race from Republican voters. One interesting part about Senator Warnock's race is that there are a lot of split-ticket voters. And I think that those split-ticket voters are a trend that we're seeing across the country with Republican voters rejecting Donald Trump and saying that they won't vote for him. Those are voters that are up for grabs for us. And so we're going to communicate with those voters. There's about 71,000 of them right here, 78,000 right here in Georgia. We have to communicate with them, and I think Georgia is definitely in play.
A big part of the coalition for Biden last time around, obviously for Warnock's campaign, was black voters. And we saw yesterday, especially Republicans are trying to make an appeal for black voters. Obviously, Biden's leading among black voters, but he's not getting the same amount of support he had in 2020. We've seen a dip in the polls. Why is that?
Look, we have to communicate to African-American voters about what President Biden has done for them and also about his vision so that they can get ahead. And our campaign is doubling down and making sure that we're continuing to do that in battleground states across the country. Meanwhile, on the other side, I think just as importantly is also calling out Donald Trump for the racist dog whistles and the things that he says about African-American voters. I believe he had an event here, or his campaign had an event where he was saying that black men resonate with him because he's a felon and because of his mugshot. I don't know many black men who wake up wanting to be a felon or want to relate to Donald Trump because he's a felon. I think black men are looking for economic opportunity, upward mobility, ability to provide for their families. And Donald Trump continues to show his hand when it comes to the African-American community by saying dumb things like that. And so we're going to call out both of those while at the same time talking about what President Biden wants to accomplish.
I want to ask you about those convictions of Donald Trump, those 34 felony convictions. We've seen the campaign actually lean into that a little bit more. But I'm wondering where you sense there is movement among the electorate on that issue, because we've seen on the other side, on the Trump campaign, they've raised a lot of money off of it. They've consolidated essentially the Republican Party base after those convictions. So where do you sense any movement, if at all?
They've consolidated his MAGA base, which is what he had before. I think the movement comes from many Americans across this country who are tired of Donald Trump's chaos and instability that he brings into our political system. He's been doing it from the moment that he entered the political realm in American politics, and it hasn't stopped since. And I think that that's what Americans are tired of seeing. But at the same time, more importantly, it's why Donald Trump is a felon. He's willing to do anything to win, get ahead so that he can get back political power and exact revenge on his political enemies.
We have seen in our polling heading into this debate that most people say this isn't going to change their minds. Are you speaking to persuadable voters tonight, or is tonight about making sure your coalition is excited, animated, turns out?
Look, we're speaking to everybody, but obviously persuadable voters are a big portion of the work that we need to do. We need to communicate to these voters and make sure that they see the two different visions in this country, one under Donald Trump, where he only cares about himself, and another under President Biden, who wakes up every single day thinking about how Americans can get ahead. Donald Trump wants to be a dictator on day one. He wants a national abortion ban. He wants to roll back the progress that we made on the ACA. He wants to gut Social Security and Medicare, and the list goes on. And we have to make sure that we're drawing that contrast and making sure that it's getting in front of all voters, including persuadable.
The president spent the past week at Camp David preparing for tonight's debate. Do you think the campaign set a pretty high bar for him heading into tonight's debate, given the extensive preparations?
Look, I mean, President Biden has beaten Donald Trump twice. I think that President Biden is going to get on the stage and be authentic. There's a lot of President Biden's going to do this or President Biden's going to do that. President Biden is the president of the United States. He's going to get on stage and act as such, but he's also going to hold Donald Trump accountable for his record when he was president of the United States and for the extreme things that he's saying he wants to do should he get another term. And I think that that's what Americans can expect to see from President Biden tonight.
We're also hearing from voters that they are looking at the performance of both candidates. They kind of know what the policies are. They know these two candidates really well. Obviously, there is a lot of focus on Biden and his performance tonight. How is the campaign thinking about that aspect of the debate?
Well, look, I think that Americans tonight are going to see that there's only one individual on that stage that is presidential, and that's Joe Biden. They saw it in 20. They're going to see it again tonight. If they're looking for entertainment and antics, I think Donald Trump is going to deliver, as he always does. That's all he knows how to do, because he doesn't have any substantive policy issues to talk about. But the president is going to perform. The president is going to lay out his vision for America and hold Donald Trump accountable for his extreme agenda.
All right. Well, we will stay tuned. Quentin, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you soon. And we're learning more about how each candidate is performing in those key battleground states. These are a handful of states that will determine this presidential race. So CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now from the big board. Okay, so Anthony, how close, just how close is this race right now?
Very. Back to you, Caitlin. No, seriously, that is it in a word. But let me show you the way that breaks down. Okay, these are our latest estimates. They're based on our battleground tracker models. That includes our interviews. That includes analysis, matching things, looking at the voter files, etc. And all of these races are either tied or within a point. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Everybody will get to know those state names really well, all of which is to say it's basically a tie. That's how close this is. And the other thing that underpins that, Caitlin, that I just got to show you, because during a debate, we talk a lot about whether anybody could move, what might happen. It's very horse racy. But look at this. Look at these really small numbers. 1% of each candidate's current voters say they might consider the other guy. That's not a lot of room for movement. Caitlin.
Yeah, and Anthony, as a political correspondent. I want to find that 1% of voters that could be persuaded. So if you're out there, let us know who you are. Anthony, we're watching tonight's debate, and we're kind of all wondering whether and how this matters in terms of changing a race that has been pretty stagnant this whole time, which has been pretty remarkable. Do candidates ever really get a significant bump in the polls after a good debate performance? Significant,
not a lot, but historically that can kind of wax and wane. Let me rewind a little bit. This is what happened after 2020, the last time these two candidates met. We surveyed debate watchers right after it, and by and large, at least by 7 points, they thought Joe Biden won. But Biden led in the polls throughout 2020 and then, of course, went on to win. I mean, I can take you back to other races, too. Back in 2016, for example, Hillary Clinton, we found after the first debate, went up about 3 points. But I will add, after the third debate, Donald Trump really closed the gap, and ultimately he went on to win. In 2012, we found, and I'll just handwrite this here, we found that by 46 to 22, uncommitted voters at the time said Mitt Romney had won that debate. And, he didn't go on to win the election either. So the point is that there might be a little bit of a transient movement. But the other thing, Caitlin, back to the first thing I said, which was in these times, there might have been more persuadable voters, especially when one or both candidates isn't as well known, than there are today, Caitlin.
All right, we will keep an eye on that. Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much. Millions tonight across the United States are going to be tuning in to tonight's presidential debate. But how exactly will they be watching this historic event? Our Torian Small has the answer.
Caitlin, I did some reaching out to state party officials across the country, and they tell me this is shaping up to be the must-watch event for their members. A source within Wisconsin Democratic Party tells me that they have at least 24 parties they're planning all across this Badger state. Republicans there tell me they're also hosting at least 2 parties in Milwaukee alone. And while all eyes will be on the stage tonight, we're keeping an eye on the events that are coming together here in the battleground state of Georgia. Many events happening all across the state, but in this region, we know that Democrats will be hosting a large gathering in downtown Atlanta. Republicans have their big party in Smyrna, just outside of Atlanta. And we also know for Republicans, they have a lot of ancillary groups looking to do heavy lifting. Predominantly black conservative activist group called Conserve the Culture is also hosting an event targeting black voters here in Georgia. They're looking to put a lot of eyes behind their campaigns because they know that this is a state that could make a difference come November. Caitlin.
All right, Torian Small, thank you. Ahead of tonight's debate, Donald Trump is calling on the president to be drug tested. It was a similar story in 2020. So what can we expect from the former president tonight? Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds joins us next for a preview. You're streaming America Decides.
I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets.
And welcome back. We are in the spin room here in Atlanta getting ready for tonight's first presidential debate. And let's bring in our debate night political panel. Ashley Etienne and Matt Gorman. Ashley served as communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris, and Matt is a Republican strategist who served as senior advisor to Senator Tim Scott's presidential campaign. Good to see both of you there in Washington. Ashley, I want to start with you. In your view, what is the biggest, weakness or deficit that you think President Biden needs to address tonight to try to change things around?
Well, he's got an audience of 1 right now. It's at 1 to 2% that Anthony was talking about that's actually going to make the difference in this next election. That's his primary audience. So I'm going to be watching to see how he creates a permission structure for those folks to get to a yes. And when I say those folks, those are disaffected Republicans, Nikki Haley voters. How does he get them to a yes? So the campaign knows that he's got to focus on that. That's why the major themes coming out of tonight will be threats against American democracy. It'll be Trump extremism from his desire to be a dictator on day one to Project 2025, as well as his inability to lead. So those are going to be the main focuses of tonight. So I'm going to be watching to see, again, how he creates that permission structure for those people to get to a yes.
And Matt, for you, and we are watching former President Trump about to get off his plane there. Matt, for you, we've seen in our polling that most Republican voters want Donald Trump to be polite tonight, to kind of tone it down. If we know anything from covering him over the past 8 or so years, we know that that is totally up to Donald Trump. No matter what people want him to do, he does what he wants to do. What do you think tonight he will have to do?
I think there's been a lot of talk and somewhat a little bit overblown about whether this person will be too calm, whether this one will be too hot. I think at the large part, what I think we'll be talking about at the end of this is whether or not Trump can steer the debate and his answers to the issues that he's actually winning on, right? That's the economy, immigration, and crime. If he can steer the debate towards those issues that he's winning on in most polls, and most folks trust him to handle that, this will be a successful thing. And I think that is why you're seeing him get a lead or a toss, depending on which poll you see, because he's actually resonating on those issues.
Can I just add, if you don't mind? I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, what I'm hearing from the campaign is that the president will not shy away from those issues because wherein they may not be in his favor in the polls, but in terms of actuality, the economy is the envy of the world, according to leading economists. Violent crime is at a record low right now, as well as immigration. Border crossings in the last month since he signed the executive order have been down 40%. So the campaign is really advising Biden to lean into these issues, not run away from them, as well as Democratic talkers that are on TV. There's no reason for us to be defensive on these issues because actually the facts are on our side.
I would welcome that debate. Trump would welcome that debate. He would.
Yeah, there's the debate that everyone wants to see, and then there's the debate that we are going to get just in a few hours here. Matt, I want to ask you, because we know, obviously, the Biden campaign has talked about the idea of democracy being front and center. We can expect Biden to go after Donald Trump on January 6th. How do you expect or want him to handle that?
I think you can pivot away from that a little bit and talk about how, look, Democrats are the ones trying to kick Trump off the ballot in some of these states, including Colorado. And what's interesting is I think whether or not that argument has been complicated by the fact that CBS and CNN and a couple other polls show Trump leading on the issue of democracy. Now, you can ascribe different reasons to that one way or another. But I also think, David Axelrod, Obama's kind of famed advisor, said, look, if you're sitting around talking about democracy around the kitchen table, the economy's doing pretty well for you, unlike it is for millions of Americans. So, look, I think that there's a stubbornness, according to Axelrod, says for Biden to push this over and over again. And look, the polls show that it's weird, and honestly, but voters trust Trump in a lot of respects, much counterintuitively to what Democrats say on the issue of democracy.
Can I just add in here?
All right, Ashley Etienne.
Thanks.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Ashley.
Okay.
We have
Next
to leave
time.
it there. We are tight on time, but we will talk to you both plenty over the course of these next few months. Ashley and Matt, thank you so much. And let's bring in our Major Garrett. Major, good to see you. I know you and the CBS News Confirm team are going to be fact-checking tonight's debate. What are you going to be looking out for, and how are you going to do it?
Things that can distinguish truth from fiction. Very simply, Caitlin. And you mentioned the CBS Confirm team. This is a separate set of journalists hired for the very rigorous process of fact-checking, not just tonight around this presidential debate, but around everything that's going to animate this presidential campaign and other things. Forensic journalists, data journalists who can really drill down and separate fact from fiction and then, importantly, reveal that work. So when people encounter what the CBS Confirmed team puts out on social media or does on any of our broadcasts or here on CBS News 24/7, you will see not only what we concluded, but how we got to that conclusion about whether something is true or is something a deep fake, a cheap fake, or just a lie in the political context. All of that is going to be the work of the CBS Confirmed team, and you'll see some of it around tonight's debate.
All right, Major Garrett, that is a huge public service to our viewers, and we thank you for that. And with the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, world leaders are watching for what both presidential candidates have to say on those conflicts. We'll take a closer look next. You're streaming America Decides.
Listen, there's 30 nations involved in Iraq, some 40 nations involved in Afghanistan. People love America. Sometimes they don't like the decisions made by America. But I don't think you want a president who tries to become popular.
And with wars raging in Gaza and Ukraine, foreign policy is expected to come up in tonight's debate. CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins us now. Margaret, of course, no one better to discuss all of this with than you. What is going to be the pitch from both candidates about how they would navigate this increasingly chaotic world that we are seeing in a second term?
Well, Caitlin, it is unique because both of these candidates have served as commander-in-chief. They have a record. But right now, the U.S. is facing an incredibly complex threat environment and is no longer the only superpower. So this is a different problem set. And President Biden argues this is the most dangerous moment we've seen since World War II, and that he's uniquely suited to hold together the Western alliance against Russia's Vladimir Putin, who's on this march through Europe, starting with Ukraine, with the help of America's adversaries, Iran and North Korea, as well as China, which has helped rebuild his munitions. Donald Trump argues a counterfactual, that none of this would have ever happened had he been in the Oval Office because leaders feared him. Biden argues the U.S. should lead allies and thus find strength in numbers to challenge China. Trump argues that allies are just exploiting the U.S. and, if you remember, in the 4 years he was president, had threatened to pull troops out of South Korea and Japan, a blind spot potentially in the Pacific, and out of Germany, which would have been a blind spot in Europe. So you will likely see Joe Biden remind people of the Trump record while Trump attacks the moment we are in and what Biden's doing now.
Yeah, and Margaret, most voters that I talk to across the country, no matter where they stand politically, are concerned about everything that you just described here. And I think they want to know, what is the policy?
And Caitlin, we haven't heard a lot of affirmative vision from either candidate, to be frank with you, about what 4 more years would look like. But let's be clear on the problem set. I mean, neither president found a way to stop North Korea's nuclear development, nor have either been able to stop Iran's malign behavior throughout the Middle East. There aren't concrete proposals being offered by either of them on those points. But directionally, they're in the same place when it comes to getting tough on China. Donald Trump takes this hammer approach on the campaign trail. You hear him talking about a 10% across-the-board tariff on goods from China to rebalance trade. He doesn't talk as much about the fact that would make things more expensive for American consumers, while President Biden argues he likes tariffs on specific things like electric vehicles and to ban the sale of sensitive technology to China. He argues economic policy is foreign policy. And as you know, on the Mideast, Biden has active diplomacy underway to help Israel free hostages and create a Palestinian state, surge in aid. That has also caused some problems with his own Democratic base. With Donald Trump, he's pretty vague on this, on the Middle East and what he would do. On Russia, also vague. He has argued, though, he would bring home U.S. prisoners back from Russia and that he would get Vladimir Putin to stop the war. Hasn't said how he would do that.
All right, Margaret Brennan, thank you so much. We appreciate that, and we will see whether they address all of that tonight. President Biden and former President Trump are expected to tackle a number of issues important to voters during tonight's debate, and we have several of our reporters spread out across the country to help us walk through some of them.
I'm Jolene Kent in Los Angeles, and the economy is a top priority for many voters tonight. And so many people are taking stock of how they're doing financially under President Biden. So our CBS News polling shows that voters overwhelmingly feel that it is harder to buy a house, raise a family, get a good job, or start a business compared to generations before. Now, part of that could be tied to those regular weekly, monthly expenses. Our CBS News Money Watch price tracker shows that since 2019, when Trump was in office, till now, the price of a dozen eggs has nearly doubled. A loaf of bread costs 53% more, and gas prices have jumped 32%. Now, looking at the data since President Biden took office in January of 2021, consumer prices have jumped 20%, according to official government data. And over the last 3.5 years, inflation has come down from its peaks of 9%, and wage growth has outpaced inflation, but it does so just slightly. And those jobs reports you've been seeing have been strong, and unemployment remains at historic lows. It was at 6.4% when Biden took office. It's now down to 4%. But interest rates remain too high for many people to get into the housing market. And there's only one rate cut projected for the rest of this year, and even that is iffy. With rents going up and the cost of homeowners insurance also on the rise, voters will be watching tonight for any relief.
I'm Camilo Montoya Galvez in Tucson, Arizona. Immigration is set to play a major role in this election and during the presidential debate tonight. And there are clearly two starkly different visions on this issue for this debate. We know that former President Donald Trump has made immigration a pillar to his political career, and that has continued to be the case during this campaign cycle. He has blamed President Biden for the record number of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally in recent years, and has vowed a radical shift in policy if re-elected. That includes mass deportations, an end to birthright citizenship, and ideological screenings for new legal immigrants. Meanwhile, President Biden does not tend to speak on immigration as often as former President Trump, but has recently taken sweeping executive action on the issue. Just weeks after severely restricting asylum here at the U.S.-Mexico border, President Biden announced a new policy that will grant legal status to the undocumented spouses of American citizens. That approach, Biden officials argue, is a more balanced one than what former President Donald Trump is offering on immigration.
I'm Shauna Mizell here in Atlanta, Georgia, where former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden are set to face off tonight in a presidential debate. And you can almost certainly expect abortion to be a topic that is brought up in the debate tonight. It has been a huge and integral part of the Biden campaign's re-election bid. He has repeatedly tied statewide abortion bans to the legacy of former President Donald Trump. They blame Trump for these abortion bans, saying that he nominated the Supreme Court justices who voted to overturn Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision. And speaking of the Dobbs decision, earlier this week was the second anniversary of that decision, but another Supreme Court decision coming out just today, actually also related to abortion in the EMTALA case, which has to do with patients getting abortions in emergency situations, even in states where the procedure is banned. So we will have to see just how this shakes out tonight, but we know that abortion was also brought up in the 2020 election between Biden and Trump.
All right, Jolene Kent, Camilo Montoya Galvez, and Shauna Mizell, thank you very much. And coming up, what can we expect from former President Donald Trump tonight? Well, we have Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds standing by to join us for a preview. You're streaming America Decides. And welcome back to the Spin Room here in Atlanta ahead of the presidential debate. We have an ally of former President Trump. Florida Republican Congressman Byron Donalds is here with us for a preview. Now, I know you're here for the debate, but you were also here yesterday campaigning for Donald Trump, specifically trying to talk to black voters here. President Biden won black voters by 80% in the last election. As you see it, what kind of percentage do you think that Donald Trump could get? What are you kind of looking for in terms of success with this voter group?
I would say success is anywhere from 20 to 25%. You got to remember, you're talking 2-3 presidential cycles ago, the black vote was 90-10, 95-5. And I think it's important, not just in the black community, but in all of America, that all of our communities start to look at the policies and the impact of those policies for just their lives, for their communities, and for the nation going forward. I think especially with black men, there is movement amongst black men leaving the Democrat Party, moving to the Republican Party. In Atlanta yesterday, talked with various black men, independents who are now leading Donald Trump, former Democrats, now Republicans, obviously going Donald Trump. So the events, having those real conversations, sometimes those tough conversations, that's what you are going to have to do in 2024 and going forward in our politics, because there's going to be an end to the monolithic viewpoint of voting blocks and demographic groups. It's going to be about issues. It's going to be ideas. It's going to be about making sure that people's lives are better going forward.
We've seen in our polling that most Republicans, 70%, want Donald Trump to be polite, to kind of tone it down tonight. Do you want that? Is that what you want to see?
Well, look, I'll tell you, that's how he's been on the campaign trail. I mean, obviously, people will pull a clip of 30 seconds, but he talks to a group for an hour. And so the Donald Trump that I have seen, whether it's South Carolina, Philadelphia, the South Bronx, Detroit, he has been laser focused on the American people, the working men and women of our country, the forgotten men and women in our country, what it means to be able to get inflation under control, to have an economy where you can build generational wealth, to be secure in our streets, to secure our border, to be respected around the globe. That's where he's been. I actually think the vitriol in this debate is going to come from Joe Biden, because what does he have to run on? If you go by his agenda, piece by piece, it's not been a success for the American people.
I want to ask you about the issue of abortion. You come from Florida. There's a 6-week abortion ban there. Donald Trump has said that he would not support federal limits on abortion. Do you think that's the right call?
I do, because a couple of things. Number one, abortion is the most personal and frankly divisive topic in our politics. Highly emotional, highly personal to women across the United States of America. Donald Trump sees it where we are today as a country. He's pro-life, but he understands that the federal government is too broad and too big to come up with just some national strategy. Let the states be the laboratories of democracy as they were set forth in our country. Number two, I will tell you, medical procedures are regulated at the state level, not the federal level. The Supreme Court in 1973 decided to regulate abortion in and of itself, but every other medical procedure is regulated at the state level. I think the state approach is the right way to go. You're going to have citizens engaging with their governors, engaging with their legislatures to come up with the right mix in each individual state.
Are you concerned, though, about the way that you've seen this issue is a potent political issue?
Yeah.
People have proven to vote on it, and we've seen the aftermath, of course, 2 years later. Are you concerned about this issue for Republicans?
I am, and I'll be honest about it, because the Democrats have been successful in weaponizing the issue of abortion to drive voter turnout. But I would ask the women and even the men in America who are pro-choice, that might be a very big issue for you, but so is the price of your food. So is the price of energy. So is the ability to get your car repaired or to take a vacation. So is building generational wealth. And so is the security of our nation at the southern and northern border. Those are major issues as well. So I would ask, even if that's your number one issue, I would ask you to take a look at all the issues, because they impact Americans every single day.
All right, Congressman Byron Donalds, we'll hear from you a lot this campaign cycle. I know it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Join us for a preview of the first presidential debate live from the Spin Room at CNN Studios in Atlanta. And stay with CBS News 24/7 during and after the debate for instant analysis. Our special coverage starts right now.